I'm actually gonna be a little bit critical here. So when I talk to people and I bring up some of the points that you've made here, and I bring them up as some sort of evidence, what they'll say is, well, exit polls really don't mean anything, and that what about people that vote by mail, or and that's not captured in the exit poll. And I was like, how is that any type of retort? It actually shows a failure to understand how polling actually works. If you get a representative sample, is the argument I make, then it doesn't matter who's voting by mail or who's not. They should be a representative vote of the state as a whole. But go ahead and just kind of give me the counter argument to that when they say that exit polling doesn't mean anything because it doesn't capture, early voting or something of that nature.
Well, first of all, I would turn the question around. I would say, why would you think that early voting would be any different than voting on election day?
Well, that's kind of what I said by saying if it's a representative sample, it should line up.
There's no reason to believe that early voting would be different than what's reflected on election day, and the true vote I'm talking about. Now, remember, on election day, they can rig the polls. Early voting, presumably, if they voted on machines, they could still rig those numbers as well. But I'm going to make the statement that the exit polls do take into account early and absentee estimates of early and absentee voting. So if your early voting is like, I don't know, 10, 20%, it's still overwhelmed by actual voting on election day. And there's no reason to suspect that people would vote any differently than they do on election day. In fact, you might find that people say, well, voters, they give you these stories, voters can lie about who they voted for, or they voted early, or they voted late. The exit polls are professionals. They know how to run the polls. They take into account various factors to adjust based on circumstances. If someone were to say, that candidate A had 60% early, but only 45% on election day, then I would say, well, why is that? Why is that? Because they're more motivated? I don't know. Nobody's ever convinced me that Democrats are more motivated than Republicans. In fact, vice versa. The evidence has shown people said that the Republicans were shy. Reluctant Bush voters was very big in 2004. That was put out by the exit polls to explain the differential. It turns out Republicans are not shy about saying who they voted for, especially in Republican precincts, districts. So that's a canard. There's a lot of people knock exit polls, but the fact is there's no documented empirical proof that the exit polls are biased. Okay, we're taking a look. The pollsters are doing samples, random samples over a well-designed, and they themselves say the design is perfect across the voting locations, or close to perfect. So nothing is perfect. Nobody's claiming the exit polls are exactly right. But when you're off by 4 or 5% in an exit poll with a margin of error that's 3% or 2%, that's a very strong indication. Now, the same pollsters that run our exit polls here do the exit polls in Europe, and there it's a totally different situation. They compare the exit polls to the vote, and they're usually very close. And if they're off by more than 1 or 2%, then they say they take another look at it. They're surprised. In this case, we're off by 7, 8% on the margin, and that's totally beyond the pale. Okay, you got to be within the margin of error. Once you go exceed the margin of error, that should raise a red flag. Hopefully, I've addressed the issue.